So today we're going to talk a little bit about Node.js, and we're going to introduce you to the very basic concepts of Node.js, but instead of going into a lot of theory, we're going to stick to a very pragmatic hands-on approach where we actually build an application with Node.js, and we make an application that connects to a database and fetches database records and shows it on the web page. So that's going to be the scope of this demo. We're making certain assumptions in this demo. We're assuming that you have the basic version of Node.js installed on your machine, and the tools that we are using are also installed on your machine. So for example, for database connectivity, we will be using SQL Server as an IDE or as an editor. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code, which is a free editor which has been released by Microsoft, and it runs cross operating systems. So it runs on Windows, it runs on Linux, and it also runs on Mac machines. So we are making the assumption that you have these tools installed. We are also going to use Express to scaffold basic Node.js projects, and we're going to talk about these tools, and we will also go ahead and provide links to these tools in the description section of this video. So just in case if you don't have them installed, you can go ahead and download the installers and run them. It's pretty easy. You should be able to get up and running in no time. So we are going to get started, and we're going to actually go ahead and start building the application right away. So in order to do that, I'm just going to go into my command prompt, and I'm going to go ahead and make a simple directory here called training samples. Maybe I can just go to my D drive, and I'm just going to go ahead and make a simple directory here called training samples, and inside that I'm going to go ahead and go inside that, and I'm going to go ahead and stub out a quick Node.js web application. Now using Node.js, you could actually write your web server very quickly. It's a few lines of code, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do a series of videos on Node.js that is going to cover basics of how the web server works and how you can write a web server. But what we're going to do right now is to get you started up and running really quickly. We are going to go ahead and stub out a very simple web application with which you can start working. Think of this as opening Visual Studio and going file, new project, and creating a ASP.NET project where you have a blank page, and then you can start developing on top of that. So that's exactly what we're going to do, and the framework that allows us to do this is called Express, which basically allows us to create simple projects, and it does all the grunt work for you, which means it goes ahead and imports the right web libraries in Node.js for you. It goes ahead and creates your routes, which are similar to your controllers. It goes ahead and creates your view, and it goes ahead and creates a simple page which you can then start modifying and start adding to. So we're going to express out an application, and we're going to call this Node.js example. Right, so this is going to go ahead and stub out an application, and as you can see, it has gone ahead and created the basic images, JavaScripts, routes, views, all of that for me, and it has told me what I need to do next. So I'm going to go ahead and do Node.js example, and npm stands for Node Package Manager, and npm install basically goes ahead and gets all the dependencies that I need in order to start building this project and start working on the project. So think of this as your, if you come from a Microsoft background, think of this as something similar to NuGet, which basically goes and gets all the dependencies for you. So this is going to go ahead and get all the dependencies that this specific project that we've expressed out needs, and it's going to go ahead and bring them in my folder structure. So it has done that, and now I can go ahead and start coding. But before I do that, I will also need to connect to SQL Server, which means I will need the SQL Server library as well. And the easiest way to import these libraries or download these libraries and use them in your Node.js example is to again use npm install, but then give the name of the library that you need along with it. So I'm going to go ahead and fetch by doing npm install MSSQL. I'm going to go ahead and fetch the SQL Server library, and it's going to go ahead and download that library and install it in my folder structure so that I can go ahead and start using it. So here it has done that, and now I'm all ready to start coding, which means I can start my code editor. And the easiest way to do that is the editor basically opens up a specific folder for me where I can start coding. I'm already in my project folder. Code is the command to open the editor, and when I hit a dot, I mean I want to open the current directory in the editor. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit this, and this is going to go ahead and start code for me. And here it is. So it has all the files that I have expressed, and this is my project, and I can start working on it. Now a quick overview of what this project has: it has my views, and this is JSON files, and we're going to talk a little bit about what JSON files are, but then we'll go into an elaborate training later. It has routes, which are very similar to your controllers, and we're also going to get a separate training on routes, but these are the two things which are there. And my index route is what I'm going to start working with, right? So this is my basic controller, the one that actually starts this. The other thing that is important is app.js, which is when we go into the basics of Node.js. We will be covering this file in detail, but as you can see here, it basically includes everything that I need to get my application up and running. So we'll cover this file in detail when we do the video on Node.js basics. Now what we're going to do here is, instead of spending a lot of time in this, we're going to go ahead and jump into routes, and this is where my application begins. So before we do anything, I will go ahead and run whatever Express has generated for me by default. So again, if you come from the Microsoft world, this will be very familiar to you. You just hit F5 to run, and code goes ahead and generates a build file for me. I will go ahead and click on file save, and I'll go ahead and save this file, and I'll hit F5 again, and this will start Node.js web server. And now I can go ahead and start hitting my application. So here is my Chrome, and my typical Node.js application, which has been expressed out, runs on my local host, and the port it uses is port 3000. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here, and you'll be able to see this is all it has generated. Welcome to Express. Now we're going to start modifying this, and we're going to start accessing data from a database. So what we will do here is we jump back. Let's go ahead and stop this. Let's hit the stop, and let's go ahead and jump back to my index route, which is what we were talking about, and we're going to write a quick function here that fetches data from the SQL Server database. So I'm going to go ahead and say function get data, which is going to go ahead and get my data, and I'm going to have a callback here. Now the concept of callbacks is interesting. The concept of callbacks is because Node.js uses non-blocking IO, and the concept of non-blocking IO is even more interesting. So typically in software development, when we write code in native languages, let's say we have two functions here called say hello and say bye. Both of these run synchronously, one after the other, and if there was a long running amount of work that had to be done in say hello, the code would basically keep on processing it, and everything after that has to wait, which is what we call blocking. Whereas what happens with Node.js is that the moment you call this function, it starts firing this function, and then it continues with the rest of the code, and when this function is over, it calls another function, which is what we call the callback, right? So a classic example would be, if I have a callback here, and I'm just writing pseudocode to explain the concept here, and if I had a callback here which had some code, Node.js would start running this function say hello, and it would run this function, and whenever it was, let's say if we had say hello here, it would go ahead and start running this function, and whenever it was done with everything in this function, it would call this callback. But while it was running this function, it would also start running say bye simultaneously. So we are aware of when this function is going to end when we refer a callback, and we can start coding here. So if there is something which is dependent on this function getting over, we can use a callback, and we can write that code in the callback. So having said that, let's quickly jump into this. So what we've done here is we have said that whenever this function is over, we're going to have a callback which is going to get called, and we'll see how all of this comes together. But right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write simple JavaScript, but this JavaScript is going to run on the server because it's Node.js. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable here, and I'm going to go ahead and import my MS SQL library, which is what I had installed in this project. And the way to do that in Node.js is to say require MS SQL. So I'm going to go ahead and basically say require followed by the name of the library that I want to import in my module. So I have my MS SQL imported. Now I'm going to go ahead and create the configuration that is needed to connect to the database, and this is a simple JSON variable where I'm going to go ahead and say that my user is SA, my password is SA1234, my database is, and I'm going to leave this blank right now, but we're going to create one, and my server is localhost. So let's go ahead and also quickly create a database while we are at it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new database here, and we're going to call this Node.Js DB, right? And we're going to go ahead and start creating our tables here, and I'm going to create a very simple table called products, which has just 3 columns: product ID, product name, and product description. So I'm going to go ahead and create a product ID here, which is an integer. Of course, it's a primary key and it auto increments. So I'm going to go ahead and set identity specification to true, and I'm going to go ahead and create a product name, which is an envarchar of 50 characters, and I'm going to go ahead and create a product description, which is an envarchar of maybe 200 characters, right? And I'm going to go ahead and save this table, and I'm going to call this products. So I've saved this table, and I'm going to also go ahead and quickly add a little bit of data in this table so that we can go ahead and fetch that from our application. So product 1, I'm just going to call it product 1, and I'm going to call this product description 1, and then we have another product here. We're going to call this product 2, and I'm going to call this product description 2. So I have 2 rows in my database, and the database is actually called Node.js DB. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, and I'm going to go ahead and use that as my database out here. So what I have here is I have imported the MS SQL library. I have created the basic configuration that is needed to connect to this SQL Server, and the next thing, of course, that I need to do is to make a connection. So I'm going to go ahead and do a new SQL.connection, and in order to establish a connection, I need configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the config to it. Now this is where it gets interesting. With Node, what you can do is you can basically have a direct function call, or you can use callbacks, which is what we were talking about. So the moment the connection is established, it would start calling another function, which is what we're going to create here, the function that gets called when the connection is established, right? So we're going to go ahead and create this function, and this function is going to contain all the errors as a parameter, if there are any errors that happen during the establishing of the connection, which we're going to get here. So I can of course do an if here saying error is something, so I can actually check for errors here. But we're not going to do that in this example. We're going to keep it as simple as possible. We're going to assume that the connection happened. So you can actually check for errors by inspecting the error variable. Now once the connection with the database has been established, the next thing I need is a request object that I can use to fire a query on the database. So this new request object that I'm going to create is basically going to use the connection. So I'm going to go ahead and say a new SQL request, and this is going to use the connection, and then the moment the request is created, we'll go ahead and quickly do a query on the request. And the query that we want to do is we want to do a select star from products. So I'm going to write down my query here called select star from products. Now this query, again the concept of callbacks, that is when this query is fired, it's going to give me the results back, and in order to capture the results back, I need to have a callback. So I'm going to go ahead and create this function that gets fired when this query is completed, and this query while firing can also return some errors. So I'm going to capture that, and I'm going to keep a record set here, which is basically going to give me all the data in that table. So I have my record set here. Now here is the interesting part. This code runs, it fires this SQL statement, gets the record set back, I get the record set back, but eventually I want to pass it to the function that calls this function, right? The code that is calling this function, and we know that when this function is executed, we're going to fire this function, which is going to be a callback. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the record set to the callback function, and what this is going to do is it's going to go ahead and pass this record set back to the code that is actually calling this function. And this gets interesting, and we'll explain this here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this line. This is the code that basically gets fired when we run our application, right? When we land on the index page here. So we're going to go ahead and call this function right away, and I'm going to say get data out here. So this is going to go ahead and get the data, but you remember we said that when get data is complete, I want a callback, because if there was, let's say, another function out here if there was another function call, it would go ahead with it and I would not be able to get the results back. But when get data is over, I want to actually go ahead and use this callback. So this is the callback that's going to get fired. So I'm going to go ahead and create a function here which acts as a callback, and I'm going to go ahead and have my variable here, which is the record set. So this record set that I'm passing to the callback here actually gets passed out here, and I receive it in this function. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to go ahead and take this record set and I'm going to pass it on my view, which will eventually end up displaying it on the page. Now if you are familiar with any form of web development, you are aware of request and response objects, and I have them available here. So I'm going to go ahead and use my response object, and I'm going to say response.render, and I'm going to render my index view, and I'm going to go ahead and pass the record set to the index view. But instead of passing it as the word record set, it will be much more interesting if I could pass it as the name products. So I'm going to create a variable here called products, and I'm going to pass this record set to it, but I'm going to call this products while I'm passing it. So here it is, my entire code, and now I can go ahead and jump into my view where I get these products, this set of products, and I can iterate through them and show them to the end user. So this is where we get into Jade, and Jade is a rendering engine that is used by Express, and it's interesting because it works on indents. So we have a block which starts here, and we are assuming that it closes here, and we have h1 which starts here, closes here. So if I want to remove this completely and I wanted to go ahead and create a table inside my block, I can go ahead and create a table here, and the fact that it's indented means that the table will get created inside the block. I could do a further indentation, and I could say that my tr would get created inside the table, and of course my td would get created inside the tr, and I could give it quick headings out here, and I could say this is product name and this one is product description. So that becomes my headings, and then for each product in this I'm going to go ahead and iterate. So now I'm going to create a new row at the same level as tr, and I'm going to say that for each product in products I'm going to go ahead and iterate and create a row, and for each row I'm going to have a cell here, and I'm going to fetch the value. This is the notation that is used to fetch values from the variables that are coming into the page, and I'm going to go ahead and say product dot product name. So this is going to go ahead and fetch the product name, and I'm going to have another td here which basically goes ahead and fetches the product dot product description. So we have a simple table here. We have a tr followed by two cells which show the heading, and then for each product inside products we have multiple rows getting created in this loop. So obviously this loop automatically ends here because these things are inside this loop because of the indentation. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly give a border to this table, and I'm going to say the border size is 1. So we are done. We've wired the entire application together. So let's just quickly run this application, and then we can quickly overview what we've just done. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this application again, and I'm going to come here again and hit enter, and as you can see it has gone and fetched all the records from my database and it has shown them on the screen. I can go ahead and quickly add another 2 products here. I'm going to add another one. And I can just go ahead and refresh this, and it's fetching my data from the database. So the interesting part here, what did we cover? The first thing that we covered is the concept of your controllers, where we created a function which allows us to go ahead and get data from SQL Server. The first thing that we did inside the function is we said that whenever this function gets over, we're going to call another function, and we're going to pass values to that function. That's the first thing that we did. Then we went inside this function and we created a SQL variable that went ahead and imported the MS SQL library. We created the basic configuration. We created a connection to the SQL Server database by passing this configuration variable, and this already gave me a callback saying that whenever this connection would be established, what do you want to do? So we basically said that whenever this connection is established, we want to run this function, and inside that function, after the connection is established, we said I want to go ahead and create a request object. So we created a request object, and then we ran a query on that request object, and then we had another callback here which basically said what do you want to do when the query is over, and we said, well, we want to track errors. We could have of course done some error handling here by inspecting the error variable, but what we also did is the moment we get this record set back by running this query, we took that same record set, we passed it to the callback, which means we in turn passed it to this code that was calling this function. Now because we had a callback here, we could say whenever we call this method get data, we could say, okay, what happens when get data is completed, what's the function that you want to run when get data is completed, and we wrote that function in line, and we said, okay, whenever get data is completed, it's going to give me a record set which is right here. So we want to take that record set, we want to render this index view, and we want to pass this record set to the index view, but we want to call it products when we're passing it. And then we went into this view right here, and basically we had this indentation which allows us to create an HTML structure, and we said, okay, we want to draw a table. Inside this table we have a row, and inside the row we have two TDs at the same level as this row. For each product that is there in these products, I want to create additional rows, so one row each for this for loop, and then inside each row that I create, I want to have two cells which show me the actual values that I have fetched from the database. So this is a very quick overview. The idea is not to go into a lot of theory. There are a lot of concepts that have been covered here, particularly concepts of non-blocking IO and the concepts of callback, which we are definitely going to go ahead and cover in additional videos. But the idea was to show you how you can quickly go ahead and get started with Node.js using your familiar databases like SQL Server or Microsoft IDEs and editors. And then as you become more and more familiar, you can go ahead and start connecting to other databases or use different IDEs or try out different things. But this was your first stepping stone to get you started with Node.js. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. We'll be covering a series of videos on Node.js very shortly. Thanks for watching. Bye.